So I'm now going to hand over to Mark, who is a frequent flyer on our forums, to go through education other than at school. I'm going to have to bid my farewells, I'm afraid, as well. So thank you guys for coming, but I'll leave you in Sarah and Vanessa's capable hands for the next section. So thank you, Mark, and thanks everybody else. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Julie. So thank you very much for your time and inviting me this morning to share some information on education other than at school, which is referred to as EOTAS, or sometimes referred to as education otherwise. And this particular information sharing is around children with education healthcare plans. So it does range for children and young people from 0 through to 25. Sorry, I'm not quite sure if I introduced myself to start off with. So I'm Mark Nixon. I'm Inclusion and SEN Manager for Data and Policy for Cheshire West and Chester Council. I was hoping to have my colleague Karima Rachi, who is a Commission and Contracts Officer for the SEN service, to join me. She was around, but unfortunately she's had to jump into another meeting at 11:30, so she does send on her apologies. And Karima's been working alongside myself and colleagues within the council to help develop some further information around this area. So if we can move on to the next slide, I'll introduce you to education otherwise. So it relates to Section 61 of the Children and Families Act, which was introduced in 2014. And it makes very specific legal provision around providing for children and young people with an education healthcare plan where it has been deemed inappropriate for them to attend either a school setting, a college setting, and does provide us with guidance on how to do that. It shouldn't be confused with the term elective home education. Although the two do result and relate in some children and young people having their time being educated at home, they are two very completely different obligations placed on the local authority, and I'll touch on that as we go. Can I have the next slide, please? So EOTAS is around a formal education package which the council has a legal responsibility to maintain and to deliver if it is agreed. With most law which is set at the start of the reform, it is often shaped by case law, which arrives over time, and the most recent case law that provides very, very good information and insight into the process was the High Court ruling of NN versus Cheshire East in 2021. And I'm assuming that these slides will be shared, and within the slide that is shared is the link that takes you into that ruling itself. So that particular judge, Judge Rowley, provided some guidance in the ruling that helps us define the journey to consider if it is inappropriate for a child or young person not to attend a school or college setting. So if we can move on to the next slide, we can touch on that. So as I said, if you wish to go into it in more detail, it starts at paragraph 447, and Judge Rowley sets out point by point some guidance around particular situations that you may be facing yourself. I think it's really important to stress that there is no one-size-fits-all answer. It is often formed by case law, but we have some very specific case law which does help guide us around the individual facts and circumstances that a council can and should consider when we have requests for children and young people to be educated outside of their school environment. Can I go on to the next slide, please? So if a family is considering, by speaking to professionals involved or their school setting, it's really important to reflect on the education healthcare plan. So section F is around the education delivery of the provision that's required to meet those needs and to support those needs. So it's really using the guidance which has been provided to determine why that provision in section F can't be delivered in school. And that can be set and shared through a whole range of information gathering. So for example, if a child has an education healthcare plan, that can be at the time of an annual review of that plan. And you can work alongside the school or the college to help gather that information. You might have health professionals that may be supporting that recommendation around the circumstances that prevent that child or that young person from actually attending school. So there might be a social, emotional, mental health, an anxiety condition that's connected with that. And we've got the medical advice to support and help guide us through that. So really, it's really trying to understand what provision can be delivered in school and what provision within the education healthcare plan can't be, by using your expertise as a family and those professionals which are supporting you, which will be in most cases the school themselves, and likelihood there will be some health professionals that will be contributing into that as well. So again, the language or the term that the law often refers to is why it is inappropriate for that child to attend. So when discussions are taking place, as well as reflecting on the provision, it's often advised for us to revisit that question quite regularly around the inappropriateness of delivering that provision in that school or college. Can I move on to the next slide, please? So the presumption in law is that a child should attend their school setting. So again, as we're saying, in terms of that information and that gathering of evidence to support the recommendations to look at what education is suitable to be delivered in the future, it's around about making sure we've got the evidence at the time of the review, or maybe at the time of the assessment, that supports your wishes for a alternative package of support to be created. So the first step is not looking at what the plan or what the education may look like in the future. It's about giving consideration to why that provision, which is already in place within the education healthcare plan, can't be delivered in school. So that's what we have to visit first, that once we've got a judgment or we've got a consideration around why it's not appropriate to deliver in a school, then the council can work with the family to look like what that package may be in the future. So it can be a combination of provision that might include some delivery from a tutor. That could be in the home, it could be in a local library, it could be in a venue where that young person feels comfortable with. We've got a range of providers which deliver provision across all forms of special educational needs in terms of personal development, in terms of their social, emotional, and mental health, communication and interactions. The difficulty with EOTAS in terms of delivering those or working with those providers is they don't have to be Ofsted regulated, and often they aren't, unless there is a certain amount of time that young person spends with that provider. So for example, that if a young person spends above 15 hours a week in that setting or with that provider, then there is very clear guidance that that setting must start to register for school. So in fact, it actually means that the EOTAS package is no longer appropriate, because that setting has to become a registered school and be Ofsted regulated. So it does come with its challenges. It does come with a lot of questions. But the first question really is around the inappropriateness of delivering the provision within the education healthcare plan in a setting, be it school, nursery or college. Then we can work collaboratively together to look at what that package might look like moving forward. Can I move on to the next slide, please? So I guess I'm going to go to the bottom of the slide, which is around how to request or how to consider a alternative package of support around education, and the timing of those are usually for children and young people with an education healthcare plan is around the review of their plan. If a child or young person doesn't have an education healthcare plan and a request for a EHC needs assessment has been made and agreed, then at the outcome of that assessment, that would be the time when the council and families would get together to agree those packages moving forward. The full detail of the package that once it's agreed in terms of the education support around the provision, once agreed, should be written into section F of the education healthcare plan. So all parties are very clear about what is being provided for in terms of the education provision and the responsibilities which lie on the local authority in terms of ensuring that that provision is in place and is monitored on a regular basis. The thing that does seem a bit unusual, but is governed by law, is that, again, if a EOTAS package is agreed, then section I of the education healthcare plan is left blank. So there is no naming of a setting or type of provision in that in section I. And again, that's been governed by case law. So the case law that I referred to before, which will be in the link within the presentation, has given us that very clear guidance on what should be in an education healthcare plan and what shouldn't be once it is deemed appropriate to look at alternative arrangements which aren't within a setting. So section I leaves blank, and we put full detail of that provision in section I. Those are monitored at least on an annual basis. However, through some new policy developments that we are working through at this moment in time, we are going to increase that to at least a termly monitoring. And there should be regular contact with a designated officer within the councils to ensure that we are maintaining regular contact with families, with that child, with that young person, maintaining regular contact with the providers as well, making sure that everybody is engaging and happy in terms of the quality of education being provided, and that if there are concerns, then we can act quickly to address those. So it may be something along the lines of that the tutor's not regularly appearing, attending at the home or in the agreed venue, or maybe they've left and we just need to engage with new providers to help support that. Please forgive me, I've got something appearing on my screen. So although the presentation is short and sweet in terms of the level of information, it is very much signposting you to the legislation which relates to EOTAS, which does change over time. And although it's reflected in the 2014 reforms, as in the Children and Family Act, the most recent legal case law which governs it is based on the upper tier ruling of Judge Rowley, which is NN versus Cheshire in 2021. The next slide, if you don't mind, shows some useful resources and links. So Special Educational Needs Jungle, IPSI, produced a lot of information around that. And a lot of information you'll see in these slides is mirrored in the resources which are available to go and look at. So it's very much around the presumption being that children and young people should be educated within their setting, but there's an acknowledgement that unfortunately due to individual circumstances that is not always possible. So it's using that law and that guidelines to allow us to challenge and ask the questions about what is inappropriate in terms of the delivery provision within section F of the plan in a setting, and if it isn't, then that's when the council can and will agree to an education otherwise package of support, which will be collaboratively built with families. There is a few rumours and questions that I hear from time to time, which is that sometimes people feel that families have to go away and build that package themselves. That is not the case. The case is that the first question is always around the inappropriateness of delivering provision in a setting, that once it's been agreed that we can move to a education otherwise, then the council must and will engage to help support families and children and young people in the right package of support. And we will come to an agreement, hopefully, in what that will look like. And once we've agreed it, then that will be written into section F of the plan as well, moving forward. And that concludes my very short presentation and sharing of information around that. I've seen a couple of questions pop up.
Yeah.
Do we want
Thank
to?
you, Mark. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll read those out for you if you like. So I'll go up to the top. We've got a question. What about children who do not have an EHCP? So a child on SEN support, what are the options for them?
So in terms of the legislation that I've shared, it's around, unfortunately, it's around children and young people with an education healthcare plan. If I'm being truthful, my knowledge around SEN support in terms of alternative provision is probably not to the level it should be, but from what discussions I've had is that you will have some children and young people who are on SEN support who have what is described as an alternative provision from time to time, which should be short term. So if there is a particular circumstance which prevents that child or young person attending school, and they may have an alternative provision put in place, which is off-site, so educated off-site. So that's the difference between EOTAS and educated off-site. Then those should be short-term agreements with school and families around those individual circumstances. But ultimately, the outcome should be that education off-site leads to full reintegration back into school. And then obviously around attendance, you've then got the attendance regulations that support that engagement as well. So really it's talking to your school around that engagement. But ultimately, like with the law says around education healthcare plans, the assumption is that children and young people should be attending school, but I appreciate there are circumstances that make that difficult from time to time. If there is medical evidence that says that a child can't attend school for whatever reason, due to their mental health, or I'm going back a couple of years ago where you may have had a broken leg and you physically can't walk into school, then there are services within the council through the education access team that will engage again in that short-term intervention to allow education to continue, but ultimately through the medical intervention that is put in place, then integration back into full-time education should take place. So I hope that answers your question. But if you need something further from me, I'll happily go away and research that and provide some clarity around it. But that's the difference, really.
So we've had a question about providers, and I think you kind of answered that before with, talking about the fact that once it's decided that education in school is not appropriate, then you kind of work together to look at what the options might be in the different providers. I think we do get quite a lot of questions from parents who are interested in finding out more about EOTAS and what it might look like, and the types of providers out there. So if there's any sources of information that you can signpost people to that give kind of examples, either locally or nationally, or case studies and things like that, because I do think that it is difficult. I know it's so what's the word, bespoke for every child, and sometimes a provider can literally be supporting one child or young person because it is so bespoke. But
it's very difficult because of the regulations to do with so as soon as a child has an education healthcare plan, as soon as that child spends more than 15 hours in a setting, there is very clear regulations through the Department for Education that says that setting must start applications to register as a school. Even if it's just one child, that it's very, so it's a very, very fine balance in terms of EOTAS and what is considered as being a school delivery of provision. So again, that inappropriate question. In terms of providers, we equally find it difficult to find suitable providers, but we have recently developed a draft policy around EOTAS, which we will be sharing on the council's website in the next month. In addition to that, we are starting through Karima Ratchi's post, who's a colleague I wanted to introduce to you. So Karima's role is around commission and contracting. It's a brand. It's a new role within our service, and Karima's role is around that framework of quality assurance. So there's lots of national and regional quality assurance groups which have been set up around addressing and working with health providers, working with council providers, making sure that we've got good quality provision within the borough. And once we've got that, and once we've got the register, we'll start publishing that information on the local offer. So although that information is not available at this moment in time, it's very much on our agenda to make available, to give families greater choice. But around EOTAS, it's very different to EHE. So if you are exploring elective home education, that gives you a right to do that as a family. That's your choice to educate your child at school. Unfortunately, the regulations and around EOTAS means that we have to have very concrete evidence to say that that child can't attend that setting because of a medical reason, because of whatever reasons they are. And then that will then limit the kind of providers that are available to us to explore. But it is something we are aware that we need to address the gap with, and we will work to address that gap in the future. But in the meantime, the SEN officers who are working with families around agreements should be given options. And likewise, we've got some very experienced families out there that tell us about providers that we haven't used before, which are equally good to access.
Sharing information going on. That's great.
Yeah, definitely. So if so if families have worked with providers who provide a particular provision which would be delivered within the section F of the plan. So again, we have to think about section F of the plan. Then we are more than happy to consider them. We contact them. We have good conversations with them. We introduce them to some of our quality assurance frameworks to make sure we have certain measures we apply to make sure that we are not putting children in a position which they shouldn't be in, and then we continually talk to them until we get that confidence that they are delivering the provision they should be delivering. So it's a very difficult situation to be in, unfortunately, but one we will collaboratively work together to hopefully achieve. Okay,
and do you have any figures for us? We've got a question on the percentage.
In terms of the number of children and young people who are currently accessing at this moment in time. So if so the current education healthcare plan population is in the region of Cheshire West at this moment in time of 3,400. I can't give you the exact number off the top of my head because it changes on a daily basis, but it's in the region of 3,400. In terms of those children within that who are accessing an EOTAS package at this moment in time, is in the region of 20. So percentage wise, it's extremely small. But for those reasons that we talked about, it's deemed appropriate to deliver that. Also, what we do stress importantly is that EOTAS should really be considered as a short-term education option. Granted, individual circumstances do have to get considered, but we always strive to look at why and how we can engage that child or young person back into a more formal education environment, because we know that new providers do come up on a regular basis, and what might not have been inappropriate a couple of years ago might be appropriate now to engage back into education, and families may not know those choices to explore. So that's why we want to review more frequently, so that we are always asking the question about why can't that young person return back to a more formal education environment.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, I think we've answered all of those. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us. We've run over, which often happens, but it's all been extremely valuable information. Thank you so much for the presentations and for all of those who've joined us and asked some really good questions as well, which helps as well. They're often things that lots of people want to know the answers to. So that's great, and we will continue to work together with you. Mark, Angela, Bo, apologies to Karima, Mark, when you see her, that she wasn't able to stay with us. That was our fault for running over, but great. Thank you very much, and we will share all of this. It's been recorded, as you know, so hopefully it will reach an even greater number of people as well with all of that valuable information. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.